So now I'm just going to briefly touch on something called Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. Have people heard of that
I just
before?
wanted to ask the same question. Who in here has either heard of or put into practice some UDL principles? Heard of them?
Heard of them, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and definitely it's I think a movement within the community college,
Yes.
isn't it? Yeah, so there's been a lot of work done in the community college in terms of developing their curriculum based on UDL principles. In the public school system, it's something that we're starting to introduce in Nova Scotia, but definitely in school systems within the United States, it's provided for within policy, and in other boards across Canada and other school districts, UDL is really becoming a large part in how they develop curriculum. So I'll pass it, well, at the end I can pass around a book, and that CAST website is really where you'll find the most around UDL, and it's something that you can use when you develop your lessons and programs with your students. So the primary principles around UDL, and I'll get into a little bit of the background, this might not make a whole lot of sense to you right now, but it provides a different means for representation, so the what of learning, when you present new materials to your students and your learners, multiple means of action and expression, so the how of learning, and provide multiple means of engagement, the why. So we'll get into, and I'm sure even though you maybe haven't heard the term UDL, it's something that you're already doing in terms of differentiating your instruction, but it's a little bit different in some of the pedagogy. So we're going to talk a little bit about how it can meet the diverse learning needs with your students, reduce barriers to learners, or learning for learners with diverse needs, and it has benefits for all learners and all students. Some people would say that UDL, they think that when I start talking about that, it means specifically technology and that we're coming in and loading up every classroom with iPads. Universal Design for Learning is beyond technology, so there is a lot of technology that can support a UDL approach, but it doesn't mean that every student needs an iPad or an iPod or a smart board in every classroom. So where did it come from? So it's Universal Design for Learning was based on universal design, which is really a term that was used in architecture. So in architecture, an architect coined the term. His name was Rob Mace. And when he was talking about it, he was looking for universal access to buildings. So making buildings accessible for everybody and not doing it as a retrofit. So not going into a building, realizing that a new employee was going to need a wheelchair or a ramp and then putting the ramp up onto the building. It was going to build every building so it was accessible right from the get-go. And some of his things that he was noticing from that perspective is the ramp benefited many more people than the individual in the wheelchair. How many of you, just think about, if you can take a couple of minutes to think about the last 24 hours, can you think of any kind of adaptations that you maybe used in terms of accessibility to buildings or information that maybe you benefited from that were designed for you? Yeah, I think on my way here today, I was leaving my building and the courier was coming in and he had his hands full, so I hit the button for the wheelchair access. And so that was something that wasn't meant for me, definitely wasn't put in our building to help the courier, but it's something that benefited all of us. Can you think of any other examples like that of things that maybe were designed for a specific use but now have a broader benefit to society? Or
I had McDonald's this morning for breakfast, I have to admit.
yes.
And there was a little girl in the washroom with her mom. And while she was trying to dry her hands, there were actually two dryers. One up high, one down lower. The lower one was obviously put in for wheelchair accessibility. However, it fit that little girl perfectly.
Yeah.
Mom didn't need to boost her up to dry her hands, nor did she have to stand on anything, she just did this. And her hands got just as dry.
Yeah. I was involved a couple of years ago with Liberated Learning. It's a tool that has been developed at St. Mary's University, and now it's being used, IBM's involved in it, it's used in universities across the world, actually, unfortunately not St. Mary's anymore, we lost funding here, but it's being used in other parts of the world. But it was a tool that was designed for individuals with learning disabilities, and what it was live captioning, so the individuals didn't have to take notes, the professors or the instructors' lectures were being captioned, and then the notes were edited and printed off so those individuals could either have them printed or emailed to them. What we found when we did studies afterwards and observing is it wasn't just the student, well actually, I should back up, it was designed also for individuals with hearing impairments. So those individuals who were deaf or hard of hearing, rather than having a live person doing the sign language, they could read it on the screen. So what they found when we observed is the majority of the students were reading the screen, not just the students who were deaf or hard of hearing. The majority of students were accessing the notes, and it allowed for them to free up having to take notes. They were able to participate in the class in a different way, and it was a benefit for all. The same thing now with when you captioning in TV, when you're watching TV. I know when I'm at the gym on the treadmill, I'm reading, and I make it sound like I'm at the gym on the treadmill all the time, but those times that I am, I benefit from reading it. There's all kinds of things that are out there now that we're benefiting from that maybe weren't designed for us, but are increasing access, and because of that, we're all benefiting.
When I worked for the Canadian Paraplegic Association, Lockheed was one of my mentors and supervisors, and he tells a story about universal design. And he's a wheelchair user. A friend of his accepted a new position in a government building. The first day, he goes to this new government building, his manager is giving him a tour. Here's the accessible washrooms, here's this. And the new staff member says, great. Stops by a fountain, goes to get a drink, and can't reach it properly. The manager is very upset with this, waits till the new staff member leaves, then puts a request in to have the water fountain dropped. So the new staff member comes back next day, sees this whole water fountain blocked off, and it's then blocked off for weeks. It's finished and it's dropped down. The manager brings him out, see, now you can access the water fountain. And he said, all you had to do was give me some cups. Universal design for learning doesn't mean you have to retrofit everything. Sometimes it's thinking around the solution that fits everyone.
Exactly.
If someone had asked him, what would help you access this fountain, he wouldn't have said, drop the fountain. He would have said, give me a cup.
Yeah.
That's what makes sense.
And that ties into the whole iPad thing. Because you go into a school and they think we're not getting iPads for every student. It doesn't mean it has to be high tech. There's a lot of low tech stuff. And so these are just some examples of things. Like, curb cuts. I can talk about that just on Tuesday on the way home from the hospital. My daughter benefited from the curb cut. So these types of things. And the other, the minivans now that you kick underneath and they raise up, that's something that benefits so many people. So really, it's an intentional approach to design, universal design, anticipates a variety of needs, broadens usability, more economical, definitely more economical to build these things in first than to go back and retrofit, and respects human diversity, and not just respects it, but values and celebrates the diversity that's out there in our communities. Okay, so UDL builds on those ideas and those principles in terms of, instead of making physical spaces accessible, we're talking about making curriculum accessible. Because right now we know many curriculums in P-12, university, and many other learning environments on the job and in upgrading situations, the curriculum puts a systemic barrier for many, many individuals, whether they're English language learners, whether they're individuals who are dealing with mental health, physical health issues, individuals with learning disabilities. There's built-in many systemic barriers in how we present curriculum. And it really allows us to address and be more flexible in how we assess and measure students' learning. So this is a cartoon of a man at the desk, and there's different animals there. We have a dog, a seal, fish, elephant, and he's saying, for a fair selection, he's talking to the fish in the fish tank. For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Everybody please climb that tree. Really, that's it. But it's not so far-fetched. We know it's not. We know how many students with learning disabilities, even to be diagnosed with a learning disability, we have to do a psychoeducational assessment and have them complete tests that we know are challenging for them. And so then they end up with an IQ score that's really not representative of what their ability is. They're told that, and then we get into that fixed mindset thing. So really, we have a long way to go, but at least we're starting to have some discussions around what we're doing. Stephen Hawking, imagine, I can't imagine anybody would have done this, but I'm sure at some point early on in his schooling, it was thought that he wasn't going to be able to take a pen and paper test, and so therefore he wasn't really ever able to demonstrate what he was capable of. And he talks to that in one of his books. So again, it's considering the needs of the broadest possible range of users from the beginning. That's the difference. If you hear the term differentiated instruction, and that's something where we go in and we look at students' learning styles and what we might be able to do, what adaptations we can make once we already have the curriculum in place. That's great, and that benefits many people, but as you know, as teachers, if you have 10 or 20 individuals that you're working with, and you have to go back and do adaptations. It's time consuming, and it's hard to really make them be something that's valuable, rather than structuring our curriculum right from the onset. It takes a lot of time initially, but it does get easier, and there's tools out there to make it easier. Then it's something that you don't have to do